Soap 7 by Craig Herbertson. Maitland knew. That's why he died. I first encountered him in the basement of the Supra app, but I'd seen him around. He'd been assigned as biologist to investigate the suspected viral infection. The doctors, baffled by the illness which had afflicted most of the residents with a sapping lethargy, sent for the expert, Maitland. I watched him as he carried boxes down to my floor, looking thin and intelligent with a slightly supercilious air. I took an instant dislike to the man, but there was nothing remarkable about him, except a peculiar aversion to television. The Supra app, in common with all living quarters, had the standard quota of screens, placed everywhere. On the rare occasions I saw Maitland, he would never take his eyes off them. I mean, everyone watches television, but Maitland was transfixed. I might be in the lift on my way down to check the thief monitors on floor 47, and Maitland would be there on the way down from the upper lab, the commercial singing out from the hall screens. The lift doors would shut, and the mini-screens above the floor numbers would come on automatically. Maitland would throw a nervous shuffle, as though my presence made him feel uncomfortable. Then the television would change to a soap, and his face would twitch in a horrified spasm. He would stop moving, forget I was there, petrified by the screen. Eccentric behaviour for an app resident. Not the thing you would expect. As house protector, I pride myself on knowing people. You have to know who you're dealing with, or you wouldn't last a week. You hear a buzz on the security doors, and there's a man outside, wearing what looks like an expensive suit. Could be an app review manager, or the high-class friend of an app owner who's lost his friend's personal code. If you've been in the job as long as I have, you look a little closer and maybe see the cuffs of his shirt are a little frayed, or his carnation is plastic. An app juggler. They call them that because they have to juggle so many possibilities on the doorstep. A lot of possibilities, but only one aim: to infiltrate the Supra app. These are tough times if you're outside in poor land. In a Supra app, you can escape the awful outside. A juggler might live for a week faking residency. Other times they're fronting for a desperate gang, casting the apps, sorting out the feeble rich, the easy touch. Occasionally they're pushing some cranky religion using drugs and hypnosis. But whatever the angle, they don't get past me. This is an expensive residence, catering for wealthy retirees who saved a lifetime for the privilege. And also, of course, people like Maitland who secure an in-house job on the strength of their professional expertise. I've got an app ownership and a big salary paid to me to keep it safe. I take my job seriously, and my job is to keep intruders out. That's why I was down in the basement the day I spoke to Maitland. A report had reached me from one of the old residents that noises had been heard down there. I got my trank gun from the locked case in my private storeroom. I looked the stairs down to the basement and took them. I took the gun because it's been known for kids to find a way past the air vent security systems on the lower floors. I took the stairs because it's been known for house protectors to get axed in the head when the lift doors open. I'm a careful man. As I reached the last step, I was conscious of the silence. Nobody likes the basement. None of the servicemen, none of the other house protectors. It's an eerie place, about half a mile square, rows of aisles stacked with abandoned furniture, app repair units, and a warehouse section with emergency tinned foods. It's here where the real skill of the house protector comes in. You become the intruder. You put yourself in his place, try to identify his motives, and think where he would go. The best intruders have always been ex-house protectors. I think it was the same long ago. Security men have always been thieves. I'd make a good thief. In this case, I made for C-row of the warehouse section. If it was kids, they'd be there. The breaking open of tins would be the source of the noise. It was the right place, but the noise wasn't made by kids. It was Maitland. He had opened several of the service supplies repair units and was sitting on top of the exposed units reading a manual. I shouted at him at first. Nervous reaction, I suppose. Maitland could have had me censured for discourtesy, but he was strangely eager to be nice. When I asked him what he was doing down in the basement that time of night, he replied in his precise voice, "No television." I told him about the complaints and how he couldn't use the basement because of the security risk. As I was lecturing him about safety, I noticed the manual he'd been reading. It was one of a number of scattered about and showing circuit diagrams and cable mats for the Super App television transmitter. I can't switch my screens off, he explained. The control is broken. Not working. Call the servicemen. I did, but Bureau says they're out on indefinite strike. Have been for months now. Yeah, I haven't seen them around. Nothing ever goes wrong with television. Maitland gave me a queer look then, as though I'd said something really significant. It made me feel that despite my dislike for him, I should offer to help. Well, I'll look at it if you like. I have a basic knowledge. I can probably raise a better reception if yours is inadequate. No, he said angrily. I don't want a better reception. I just want it turned off. I was stunned. A crazy statement made me realize why nobody liked the basement. There was no television down there. I couldn't think of a single room in the Super App without it. Personally, I would have felt really awful without the background noise. So I couldn't make Maitland out at all. But I'd offered to look at his controls the following night. That was one offer I wish I'd never made. Maitland's app was a mess. There was lab equipment everywhere, science journals piled on chairs. A long table carried a huge microscope. He brought out a cup of funny-tasting tea and started blabbing about his work. How there were 3 separate types of life, animals, plants, and a third kingdom, Protista, the kingdom of simple organisms. Most of it was above me, but I remembered one thing. I couldn't see why, but it struck me as important. Maitland had been moving about in a restless manner, and he stopped all of a sudden and fixed me with his compulsive stare. When a parasite enters the tissues, part of its composition is an antigen, he said. The antigen contains the proteins that excite the production of antibodies. They're like 2 enemies, one the invader, the other the defender. As house protector, that kind of appealed to me. But Maitland was pulling all the clever crap in me, so I stopped him mid-track. Have you got the sickness beat, Maitland? That shut him up for a moment, and I strolled over to the microscope to have a look down the eyepiece. You won't find the answer there. That's a compound microscope. I'm looking for a particular bacteriophage, a virus, parasite, and bacterium. It might be as small as 500 angstroms across. Small, eh? How come they make you so ill? They multiply and host bacterium, then its destruction releases the new viruses. They contaminate the tissues. Disease is a symptom. Maitland appraised me for a second, then relaxed and said in a hesitant voice, But I'm no longer sure that we're dealing with a normal virus. I made a joke about mutant tadpoles, but Maitland didn't laugh. He took me into the main room. It was sparsely furnished, a simple table and chair, and a low bookcase along one wall. Like all apps, it had 4 screens placed in each corner at head height, so that you could have unrestricted vision, whatever you might be doing. There was a soap on, Soap 7, the one about the family who never leave their app, always arguing about who's going to wash the dishes. It's really funny. Maitland had tried to erect a kind of tent in the centre of the room. Have you ever noticed, he said quietly, that it's impossible to pin anything to the walls within 6 feet radius of the television screens? He handed me a hammer and some pins. Try. I shrugged and walked up to one of the screens. The Soap family were all sounding on the dog, telling it to do the dishes and laughing. I tried to hammer a pin in, but Maitland was right. There must have been a concealed steel moulding around the whole area. Can you switch it off? He said. I handed him the hammer and pins and took the lower casing off the screen. The tone and colour dials were quite complex, designed to produce pictures for all tastes. They were exactly where I remembered them, but the on-off switch was gone. I stood for a minute, puzzling. Then I heard Maitland behind me. No volume control either. I nodded and replaced the casing. Must be new models. I don't remember them coming in. You'll just have to wait for the strike to finish, then call Bureau. They'll switch them off for you. There's one thing I haven't tried yet. Maitland had an edge in his voice that made me look up. I watched incredulously as he flung the hammer at the screen. It touched square on and bounced off, landing heavily on the table and shattering several cups and saucers. I'll have to report this, Maitland, I said. The screens are not your property. You own the app, but television is part of services. Damage to it is a house offence. Maitland smiled a thin smile. But if you look, you'll see, that it's not harmed. He was right. The screen was unmarked. I warned him to get a grip on himself, told him I would refrain from submitting a report if he could concentrate on beating the viral infection. He cut me short then and shouted something at me in a warning tone. As I left the app, I thought that what he'd said, watch Soap 7, and his excitable tone didn't seem to match up. As I lay in my bed with the warm glow of television all around, I realized that I'd mistaken his words. He'd actually said, watch out for Soap 7. It was about 2 weeks later when I first became uneasy. Maitland hadn't been seen much. It was assumed he was working like an admin on some serum. The people he was seeking to help seemed to have got used to the condition, and they spent most of the time confined to app or wandering like faded wraiths along the corridors. I was fine, and personally it didn't matter to me that the others were sick. Their behaviour was little different from what it had been in the past. I just got on with my job. I was on the roof making some minor adjustments to the solar mirror. The roof was my favourite place. Although it was marked off as a leisure area and rows of sunbeds and sunshades were arranged around the large pool at its centre, it was rarely used by residents. The multi-movie drome screen was situated on the west side of the roof and rose much like a mammoth billboard towering above the esplanade. The nearest neighbouring Supra app was about 3 miles away to the northwest, and others fell at regular intervals in parallel lines which disappeared into the horizon. You could see the giant screens in each. Sometimes when a face appeared large on ours, you could see its dwindling echo on theirs. It was like watching rows of identical sarcophagi standing up in the blue catacomb of the sky, their intricately painted heads staring out. I liked this area, especially at night when the sky was dark and lit only by the screens. You could imagine there was no buildings out there, not even the prefab shanties of the poor, which could be seen dotting the plains in daylight. No buildings, just rows of flickering pictures. I was enjoying this, thinking of coming up with a bottle of something, when I saw Maitland gesturing at me from behind one of the water tanks. His face was haggard, and he looked thinner than when we had last met. As I walked towards him, I thought about that thing he'd said, watch out for Soap 7. I hadn't noticed anything in particular about the programme, except that it had taken over the evening's news slot and now extended to cover over 3 hours. It was highest in the ratings as well, but then it was a damn funny show. Good shows that caught the appeal of the audience, always got longer slots. That's why there were so many soaps, and in app news, all the internal gossip of the Super app, that's what people wanted to see. Maitland grabbed me by the sleeve and pulled me into the shade of the water tank. Have you seen what they've done? Who's done what? I said, disengaging my sleeve. This track's almost over. Puromane came today when I was in the upper lab. The dispute's been narrowed down to the repair department. Calm down, Maitland, I said. The man was staring about him like paranoid. Get to the point. Better see for yourself. He took me down to his app. I noticed as soon as I entered that he'd managed to jerry up a series of sheets that covered the screens. It seemed weird to me that he'd want to do this so badly. The room looked terribly uninhabited without television. I considered referring the matter to the residence committee. Maitland seemed to be letting everybody down. But I had been looking at the 4 corners of the room and had missed the point. Maitland jabbed his fingers upward. There on the ceiling was a massive screen. Why, that's marvellous, I said without thinking. Marvellous, shouted Maitland. I'm trying to my life to get rid of television, and you think having a 7-foot screen on the ceiling is marvellous? Well, I've heard about the screens on it in that news the other week. I'd never seen one before. The committee memoed bureau for them. You mean they knew they were coming? Maitland looked at me as though I'd slapped him. Then he gathered himself and suddenly grabbed my lapels. He hated me, I could tell, but he had to spill it to someone. I know something. It's there in my mind, but I can't define it. There are a million little things that add up. Something awful. Sweat was dripping from his long face. When did you last see an app juggler? They don't come anymore. When did you last see a resident leave the building? I've been working in the upper lab and I've got a clear view of the shuttle park. The shuttle never moves. His arm fell to his sides. I sometimes think there's nothing out there, just props and a giant movie set. Laughter roared. A trailer for Soap 7 had come on. The family stared down at us from the ceiling. It all started with Soap 7, he said, dropping his voice lower, as though he might be overheard. That family. Look at them, man. They're not actors. When I got back to my app, the first thing I noticed was the 7-foot screen. It was in every room. As I lay back on the bed, Soap 7 was in full stride. The happy faces of the family were alight with laughter. The show had been extended by another 2 hours, so I wasn't surprised that the cast were in a fine mood. But Maitland was beginning to get to me. I should have been pleased about the new room. A week ago I'd have been over the moon, but now that uneasiness had crept in. It kept intruding on my mind that the family in Soap 7 were laughing at me. In the early evening I roamed the deserted corridors and hallways, the grinning faces of the family shadowing my every footstep. I had grown used to the endless soap show, which had now swamped its every rival. In a sense, it was a satisfactory replacement for the minimal contact I had previously with the other residents. The family always grinned, exuded a friendly warmth which had been absent in my human relationships. It was rare to see a resident now. Most had returned to their apps to immerse themselves in Soap 7. When I did bump into one as I went about my daily tasks, they seemed lacklustre, but also in an indefinable way self-assured, as though they needed nothing or nobody. That's why I was astonished when the message sounded over the tannoy. I hadn't heard the tannoy for about 3 months. It interfered with television broadcast, and the residence committee had banned it except for life and death emergencies. A voice kept repeating, "House protector to the roof." Residents appeared in the hallways clad in slippers and dressing gowns. They all shouted complaints at me in tired voices. The tannoy was fuzzing Soap 7. There were some people on the roof, the manager, a couple of the residence committee, and a serviceman. A small crowd had trailed after me, wanting to know what was going on. "It's Maitland," said the manager. "He's up here." He gesticulated towards the multi-movie drone screen. Up on the top rung of the service ladder clung Maitland, looking small against the immense screen. I hadn't seen him for a month. He'd been thin then, but now he looked skeletal. He appeared to be frozen to the ladder with fear. "It's up to you," said the manager. "You're the house protector." I might have argued the point. I wasn't sure that it was my responsibility, but I felt a compelling force, a sort of dramatic, almost histrionic urge to be with Maitland. There was no desire in me to help Maitland, only assist whatever fate had chosen for him. He had overcome his terror. The last rung had been scaled, and he was now crawling along the mantel at the top of the multi-movie drone screen. Clutching the 6-inch-high handrails, he looked like a spider, walking a strand above the giant heads of the Soap 7 family. I left the small crowd and prepared to follow him. Up on the ladder, I became aware of the wind. You were shielded from it on the esplanade by sheets of clear plastic. I had never noticed them before. I became aware of the building, too. It was unnerving. I knew why Maitland had been afraid to go on. If you fell, the wind would take you out into the void. Fluttering like a piece of paper, you would fall hundreds of feet to your death. I found myself thinking how the great drop into nothingness was somehow worse to contemplate than the equally fatal drop to the esplanade. Evening had fully descended as I reached the top of the ladder. My initial view was impeded by a box jutting out on a small gantry. Once past this, I could see the flickering pictures of the other super app screens winding like lines of streetlights in the dark. Ignoring the fear in my stomach, I began crawling towards Maitland. Suddenly, a great booming noise like an ocean trapped in my head froze me to the handrails. Maitland, too, was nearly overbalanced. "Laughter," he said, eyeing me up, from the multi-movie drone public address system. Sometimes it's carried out by the wind, but mostly it comes out loud and grotesquely distorted. Maitland looked physically ill. It was obvious he hadn't slept or eaten for a while. His angular body was wasted, but his nervous manner had disappeared with the fat. If anything, his eyes shone with a deeper intelligence, a kind of calm. He was trying to open a maintenance box with a stolen set of servicemen's tools. "What's this all about, Maitland? You'll have to come down. I'll swing it for you to be kept on at the app." The last was a lie. The residence committee would have him transferred and would probably recommend psychiatric help. "The basement," he said, locking a spanner in a bolt. "Have you been down lately?" "What were you doing down in the basement? I warned you." "There are screens down there now. Every aisle has one." "Don't be ridiculous. Who would need? It's true. They must be for the benefit of the servicemen." "I don't care who they're for," he said harshly. His finger slipped, the spanner nearly lost overboard. It means that I have nowhere to hide. Hide from what? Haven't you been watching television? Sure. Soap 7. Noticed how long it runs for? It runs nearly all day. It's the best show. I thought you house protectors were supposed to be perceptive. Look, man, look at them out there. He pointed wildly to the esplanade. I could see that the seats were unusually full. The people attracted by Maitland's escapade had remained. There must have been about 30 of them sprawled out in the sun chairs, looking oddly inhuman in the glow of the big screen. Well, what do you expect, Maitland? You come up here trying to commit suicide. Of course a crowd is going to watch you. You still haven't grasped it. They're not watching you and me. They're watching Soap 7. A great roar rose from under us, canned laughter distorted by the wind. I saw that Maitland was right. The small audience out on the esplanade was wreathed in appreciative smiles. It's a good program, I said, but a suicide should be better viewing. I don't like you, House Protector, but you seem to be the only other unaffected person, the only one who will listen. The wind dropped. I crept a little closer to Maitland. He stopped using the spanner and fixed his eyes on me. It's Soap 7. That family did damn little in the first place, but they do nothing now. Sure, they get up to go to the toilet and answer the doorbell. How can people watch that all day? We're starring in a black comedy, House Protector. I'm the lead, you're my support. But I'm afraid the rest of them are just underpaid extras. Their personality has faded in direct proportion to Soap 7's viewing time. That's an interesting theory, Maitland, I said, inching forward. Just how did you arrive at it? I first stumbled on the truth when I was working on the supposed virus that's infected the super app. I couldn't find any trace of virus from the samples I'd taken. There simply was no virus. The condition had to have been caused by something else. The people were not really sick. They just seemed to be fading away. Their personality was diminishing. It was simple to correlate the sickness to the increase of Soap 7. Maitland hardly seemed to be aware of me. He began to work on the bolts again, taking all the time in the world. The virus is a soap. It affects transmission, multiplying to take in the whole non-real world of television. At first it amused me. I thought it was simply applying a biologist's metaphor to the state of television. But then, as Soap 7 began to spread so quickly, I began to examine it in more detail. I realized then the terrible truth, that it was in some sense sentient, and once it had expanded to encompass all the other programs, we would have to seek a new host. I was only feet away from Maitland, but the wind had risen. With grim intent, I clung to the handrails, listening to Maitland's impassioned voice. I don't know how it came to be. Perhaps man has grown weak. It's beyond me, but I know that it is a virus, and it operates like a kind of sponge soaking up reality. It's using the television transmitter to infiltrate this world, but that's its weakness. I spent months poring over circuit diagrams and cable plans. I've traced it all to this maintenance box. If I can smash a simple circuit board inside it before Soap 7 engulfs the network, every screen will die and its access will be denied. Maitland's features broke into a fond smile. Look at those screens out there in the night. Each one commands the attention of an entire super app. Perhaps 10,000 people in each isolated building, all fixed on a single television transmission. Soap 7. But not all will have succumbed. In some there will be men and women like me thinking and fighting back with everything they know, fighting antibodies in defense of reality. The last bolt gave. The maintenance box was whipped away by the rising wind. Maitland raised the spanner high above his head to deliver a mighty blow to the exposed circuitry. And as he did, I jumped. His eyes flared wide as I leapt for him. I missed, only just managing to grasp the handrails at his feet, but it was enough. Maitland tottered, pointing at me with a look of horrible knowledge. He fell. The wind gripped his body like a paper man and threw him out to the void. A roar of noise rushed under me, the sound of giant laughter, distorted by the wind. I remembered the gantry which had obstructed my ascent to the ladder, and some instinct made me turn. There was a small television screen perched there, facing me. The family on Soap 7 were laughing and cheering. My mind seemed to be unhinging. A question struggled to be answered. And then I knew. I knew what Maitland had discovered too late. He had finally realized why we had been drawn to each other, despite our mutual antipathy. It was inevitable. as inevitable as the attraction of an antibody to an antigen. I rose to greet the Soap 7 family, my family.